So over to you, Floyd.
Hello, I'm Floyd from Tennessee, and we started using Workday back in 2009. We were their seventh live customer or seventh customer, and so at the time we went live, there were no calc fields, so you can kind of imagine what that was like. So we were, even though they can be a little complicated. We absolutely could not survive without those. So we appreciate what can be done with those fields. This was an area that I wanted to touch on that really touches on what Matilda just talked about, and I fully support that type of naming convention to keep the fields straight from a technical perspective. But the problem that exists today is that that field name also becomes the default field header in every use case that it's used in every report. And so when you use the technical naming convention for the field, you also then by default end up having to override in every single place you use that report to make a more meaningful username, or your users are stuck looking at a field that has technical naming conventions in it. So this brainstorm idea that was just on the screen there is seems like a simple request that Workday allow you a field on the calc field that it's essentially your default header name. And then that would be used in any place that field is used unless you override the header name in that location. So that's been out there for a couple of years now. Doesn't have a lot of votes yet, but I would like to see that happen, because I think then I would probably tend to use those technical naming conventions more.
Okay, Floyd, so just to be clear, if this brainstorm went through, you would be better with using the calc field naming conventions, because then all of the reports won't have the technical name, they'd have the default name.
Then you have the best of both worlds. The people doing the development have tools that can help them without also impacting and confusing the users who consume reports that have those fields on them.
Okay, should we look at the next brainstorm, Floyd?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is an older one than that, and it's still something I have a strong interest in, but this was logged back in 2010. And the idea would be that when you're doing calc field development, instead of you having to embed pieces of codes in the field name that are for the metadata of that field, that you would be able to put your session in what I call verbose mode, where when you're doing development, so that you would actually be able to adjust the instance display name of the fields that you're working with, and you could choose what you wanted Workday to pull out of the metadata and include with that field name. So if you wanted the business object, you could choose that and it would show. If you wanted the calculated field function, you could choose and that would show. And then when you were done working in that mode, essentially you could put your session in normal display mode, and you would not have had to go out and try to get everybody to agree on a naming convention. Along with that, I would be also interested in a different way of doing this, that there be like an information button or a hover text for each calc field that would show all the different metadata pieces about that field. And in that case, I think it would help, because you're not having, especially if you're a very large company, you're not having to try to negotiate naming conventions. We used to have to do that amongst developers when you're writing code, and it's very difficult for people to constrain themselves to naming things in a way that makes sense for everybody.
All right, Floyd, I'm putting myself in the middle because I realized there was a question I wanted to ask you that we didn't get to before today. I think it was a brainstorm that you told me about some years ago, though. If I'm in a report and I'm looking for a field that I know is going to be true false, without a naming convention, you just know the type is a true false. Is that a separate brainstorm where you would be able to sort the fields and like, only see the true false fields or only see the date fields, for example? I'm going to take myself out of the middle here.
That that would be really a different way, another useful way of doing things, so that if that Workday could provide a what's called a search category by field function or even field type, dates. I think there is a brainstorm idea out there about having one on field type, so that if you were really looking for date fields, you could go to that search category and see all the date fields, but that hasn't happened either. So both of those, calculated field function and field type, would be very useful search categories for field.